Welcome back to Tiny Blue Games. My name's of course Seesaw or Chris, and today we're talking about the big 4 MMOs in 2020. Now, as time goes on, and specifically as we get to the end of the year, I often see a lot of videos about up-and-coming MMOs to be excited for, and I think in general, the MMO market is sitting around waiting for the next big MMO. It feels like the MMOs that are popular, that most people are playing, have been on the market for a long time and they're quite stale. And don't get me wrong, they have been on the market for quite some time, so it's not crazy for people to think this way. I think, though, that the MMO players in general are too focused on waiting for the next big thing as opposed to just enjoying what they can play while they are waiting. And I've been there. You get so wrapped up in the hype that you can't even enjoy the MMO that you're currently playing, and you're kind of just in this sort of limbo stage where you're waiting for new games that come down the chute. And it's really frustrating because it makes it hard to enjoy anything that you're currently able to play. So today we're going to be focusing on the games that you can play right now, what they offer, and why I think you should enjoy them even if you are waiting for that next big thing. So before we get into it, I know the big issue that people are going to have with this video is what I've decided to call the big 4 MMOs, because it might not include what you consider to be the big 4 MMOs. So I'll get right out there with it. The big 4 I'm talking about are World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, The Elder Scrolls Online, and Guild Wars 2. Now, I've chosen these games for several reasons. Number one, they are some of the most popular MMOs on the market right now. Number two, they are a good mix of the more premium sub-based games and the less expensive buy-to-play games, as well as a good mix of vertical progression as well as horizontal progression. Even more to that, you can kind of compare them directly. For instance, World of Warcraft is very comparable to Final Fantasy XIV, and The Elder Scrolls Online is very comparable to Guild Wars 2 in my opinion. There are, of course, a lot of other popular MMOs that could have been included on this list. Some of the honorable mentions would be Star Wars The Old Republic, Old School RuneScape, Black Desert Online, Albion Online. The main reason, though, that I'm choosing these 4 MMOs is that I do think that they've been around for a long time. I think they are really good options for people to play right now, and I happen to know a lot about each of these MMOs, whereas some of the other MMOs I've just mentioned, I've only played briefly, and I don't think I'd be able to do them justice in this video. The final thing I will mention is that I am a Guild Wars 2 or ArenaNet partner. Does this mean I won't say anything bad about Guild Wars 2? No, I will say the good, I will say the bad. I just need to be transparent about that. It does also mean that you will find 2 sponsored links in the description below. If after this you do want to try out the game for free or purchase the expansions, please consider using those links to help out the channel. Alrighty, so that's probably enough preamble. Let's jump into the actual games. We're first off going to be talking about World of Warcraft, and this is probably the one MMO that people are for sure not arguing should be a part of this list. World of Warcraft's been around forever, and it's been popular since its release. It's never ever been a consideration of not being on the big MMO list, and specifically it's going to be launching its next expansion, Shadowlands, next week. And you might be thinking, so what? They launch a new expansion every couple of years, why is this so important? Well, for vertical progression games, which World of Warcraft is, expansions are a very special time for many, many reasons. The first of which is that it is the easiest time for people to either try the game for their first time or to return to the game, because you can catch up to everyone else in the game relatively easy. The other thing is that there is a certain amount of excitement in the MMO community as well as in the game itself for the expansion. If you've never played an MMO right around an expansion, there's kind of a hype period leading up to it, as well as I'd say the first few months after it. And even if it is a bad expansion, which, let's be honest, there's a bit of a gamble here when it comes to World of Warcraft, the overall amount of excitement can make the expansion enjoyable even if it turns out to be bad in the long run. So if you haven't considered trying World of Warcraft and you're thinking about it, I'd say now is a really good time to give it a shot. The other thing to consider is that with the recent level squish, which in itself is a whole nother reason to check out WoW if you've played way back when and you haven't tried it since then. The sort of free trial that you would get with the game that would only go up to level 20 is considerably longer now, considering there's only 50 levels before Shadowland and 60 levels after Shadowland. So 20 levels out of 60 levels is a lot more free trial compared to 20 levels out of 120 levels. So I would think it's worth trying if you haven't tried the game in a while. So apart from the level squish and the new expansion, why try World of Warcraft now? What's really changed? Well, actually not anything, and that's kind of one of the biggest pros for me in terms of World of Warcraft is you know what to expect as a player. The game has a very specific development cycle. You know to expect an expansion every couple of years. You know that there will be these different raid tiers and Mythic Plus seasons. You know that there will be really good dungeons. You know that there's a good mix of content. You have some PvP to do. You have some PvE to do. You have a lot of questing, a lot of professions. Like there's something for everyone in World of Warcraft, and I think it's the game that probably does this the best. I mean, it's a theme park MMO that has a ride for everyone. So if you are someone who's looking to play with friends, it's often that game that you're able to play with friends that sort of enjoy different elements of a game and sort of pull everyone together. If it's been a little while since you have played World of Warcraft, there are some bigger changes that you might not be aware of. There is this game mode called Classic WoW, which is a part of your sub fee. So you kind of get access to two different MMOs while playing the same, paying the same price for World of Warcraft. One of them is Retail WoW, and that's the current Shadowlands that will be coming out. The other one is Classic WoW, which is currently on Vanilla WoW, but potentially could lead to some other expansions that you might have some longing memories for. So it's kind of nice because you can bounce between the two of them depending on what's popular in each one at the moment. And the other thing to keep in mind is there are now WoW tokens, which is a way that you can pay for your sub fee through in-game gold, which I know isn't for everyone, and realistically, if you do have a job, it might be more efficient to just work an hour of your job and pay for your sub fee, but it is a nice option specifically for those who are just trying to minimize the amount of money going out to games no matter how it happens. I know a lot of people just really enjoy the idea of not paying monthly, like just removing that from their mind, even if it is less efficient technically to do it in game. So two things to keep in mind, but World of Warcraft is always a strong contender and always worth checking out if you are looking for an MMO to play. So from WoW, we're going to move on to Final Fantasy XIV, and I'm going to compare the two of these games because they are kind of the premium sub-based games, and they are both vertical progression. They both have similar combat mechanics. Some people are probably going to hate me for doing this. Specifically, you kind of have to be slated to either like Final Fantasy XIV or like World of Warcraft. I know there are some people who like both, and I find myself in that sort of area, and I feel kind of odd about it sometimes because people are like, wait, you like both of these games? That seems crazy. And certainly to say that I'm playing both of them at the same time turns some heads towards me. But they are very comparable games, and I think it's worth sort of comparing them one-on-one. Now, the big difference here is whereas World of Warcraft is now releasing their expansion, Final Fantasy XIV is kind of ending the cycle of their expansion. So they're nearing the end of the Shadowbringers expansion, getting close to that, I wouldn't say content drought, but there is kind of that quiet period at the end of each expansion, and it's the less maybe exciting time to jump into the game, specifically if you've been playing through the expansion and you've already done it. If you haven't, there's still there's tons of content to do because there's a whole expansion worth of content, not to mention the expansions before that. But it is something to keep in mind if you are stumbling into the game at this point. With that said, the Shadowbringers expansion was one of the best received MMO expansions in the last several years. Like it got really great reviews, and it was honestly the thing that drew me into Final Fantasy XIV for the first time. And I should sort of mention this at the start, is that I am less experienced with Final Fantasy XIV compared to a lot of these games. Not necessarily in the amount of time played, but in terms of how far I've gotten through the game. See, I've really been taking my time and going through each and every story step of the expansions and enjoying myself. And I do recommend that if you haven't done done it because the game has a ton of really good content if you take the time to enjoy it. And that's kind of a good segue for us to talk about the main differences between World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV is probably the pacing, specifically when it comes to leveling. See, in World of Warcraft, there's a lot of emphasis on getting to end game, and that tends to be true for most MMOs. The game, quote-unquote, starts once you get to the end. However, Final Fantasy XIV puts a lot of focus on the journey, specifically through their main scenario quest, which is their story quests. And unlike other games where leveling or, measuring your progress based on purely your level, this game really focuses on how much of the story you've completed, and you need to go through the main scenario quest to unlock pretty much most of the end game content. So I would really recommend, if you are trying the game for the first time, or if you are returning to the game and it might not have clicked the first time, instead of focusing on rushing to the end, do take your time and enjoy the story, specifically knowing that we are kind of at the end of that expansion cycle and that there is a bit of waiting time, so you can take your time and enjoy it. Now, in terms of core MMO mechanics, the game works very similarly to World of Warcraft, or really most games on this list. There are classes, or as they call them, jobs. You level up to max level, you do dungeons, you do raids, you do different type of content to become stronger. It is a vertical progression game, so that's why it is being more directly compared to World of Warcraft, meaning that you're always getting stronger in terms of actual player power. For instance, each new raid will have some stronger gear for you to go and get. So if you enjoy that, it's something to keep in mind. Now, the other couple things I should mention is, number one, PvP, although you can do it, and I've been doing more and more of it as I've figured out how to queue up for Frontlines, is not as strong in Final Fantasy XIV as it would be in a lot of these other games, specifically World of Warcraft. So if you are very PvP focused, I'd probably recommend a different game for you to try out. The other thing to also keep in mind is that they have recently sort of redone their free trial of the game, which does allow you to go a bit further and experience the first expansion, Heavensward, which is a tremendous amount of content to try for free. So if you've never tried the game, now is probably a great time to check it out and see what it's all about. This moves us into The Elder Scrolls Online. Now, The Elder Scrolls Online is a very particular game for me. I hadn't played it. Well, I played it in the beta, which was a really long time, and if you knew anything about the beta, it was particularly bad for The Elder Scrolls Online. So I stayed away from the game for quite some time, and I tried it again at the start of 2020, at which point I got completely invested. I started playing it a ton, I got all of my friends into it, and we enjoyed it probably for 6 months, at which point we all of a sudden started getting less interested in it. And I'm going to explain both parts of that more clearly, but I just wanted to paint a picture there. So I've actually played a tremendous amount of Elder Scrolls Online this year, but in my lifetime, not so much. So what happened? And let me explain both sides of this, because it is a very interesting thing, and it does sort of show the strengths and the weaknesses of The Elder Scrolls Online all in one pretty little story. So when I joined the game, I got the base game for a very good price. I think it was like $10 Canadian or something, which is really cheap when you consider the amount of content you're getting. And I went through the game and I took my time. I really explored, all of the quests, all of the story, all of the dungeons. I had fun creating my own unique class while being able to, to sort of choose your own class and add all these different weapons to it and really customize yourself to feel unique, and just doing things at my own pace. That was a lot of fun. I did that with friends. I had exactly 3 friends, and everything's kind of like 4-person group content, so it was a tremendous amount of fun. We did PvP together. Everything was going smoothly until we hit max level and started looking at how to optimize our characters for raiding. See, we're not good. I'm going to be very blunt here. We're not necessarily good, but we are good enough, quote unquote, good enough to look online and see how to improve our DPS and be an asset to our groups. It was at this point that we started seeing some of the flaws. For instance, the animation canceling. And this, whenever you hear someone talk badly about the Elder Scrolls Online, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be about the combat. And the combat on paper sounds really good because it's action combat, you get to customize your classes a lot, and that should feel really good, except for two things. Number one, if there is a lot of class customization, there's always still going to be a meta, which means that classes are going to feel more and more similar. And in this case, it's kind of the worst version of that because every class can use every weapon. So if there's a weapon skill that happens to be very strong, all of a sudden, all of these classes that can use this weapon skill are going to be using the same attack at the same scenario. Now, there are still differences. It does still feel different. And before I really get too far into this, if you like the Elder Scrolls combat, that's great. It's a personal preference. It's a style that, you shouldn't feel bad for enjoying it. I'm just explaining why I and some other people might not enjoy it as much. The other and perhaps bigger issue is the animation canceling. Now, the reason this feels so wrong is that it is clearly something that wasn't necessarily intended at the start of the game. And what I mean by this is people will cast bigger attacks that have big animations, and they will use a small attack in between those attacks to kind of cut that animation and get into the next animation quicker. And you have to learn to do this very fast in order to provide really good DPS for your group. So it becomes this issue where you're trying to sort of cut yourself off throughout, like there's all these really cool animations, like they look super cool, but you're not actually doing them because you're animation canceling as quick as you can to improve your DPS. So it does two things. It makes the combat feel very janky and like doesn't look super great because your character's like sort of having this flashy like dance party, and then it makes it so that instead of having a more meaningful rotation of these actual bigger skills, you're kind of trying to weave in all these just basic attacks as quick as you can. And once again, some people really enjoy this. It feels to them like a very high skill cap combat, and it is, because you have to figure out that this is how you're supposed to play the game, which the game doesn't teach you this. Obviously, like you're not going through the game as a new player, and there's not a tutorial that says this is how to animation cancel our system to have better DPS. Like that doesn't happen. You have to go online. So that's already an issue I have with it. Whenever the way to optimize your character is kind of breaking the game, and it's not breaking the game in the sense that the devs don't want you to do this. Everyone's aware of this. It's not a secret. Everyone knows this. It's just unfortunately how the game has been staying, and maybe one day it will change, but it's remained this way for long enough that I wouldn't join the game hoping that that's going to change anytime soon. Now, are there reasons to play the game? Absolutely. It's got one of the best quest systems where everything is fully voiced. If you're into the Elder Scrolls story, you're gonna love dealing with the quest givers and learning more lore about specific pieces of the game. Specifically, the most recent expansion is all about Skyrim, which I know a lot of people enjoy, so I think there's a ton of content for you to enjoy. And if you're gonna join the game casually with some friends, I think it is a really fun time to do so, because there is, once again, a lot of fun quests and story stuff to do. I would just keep that in mind and really be aware of what the end game looks like. The other big thing that a lot of people have issues with is the monetization of the game. It is pretty cheap to get into the game, but there is a lot more that you have to pay with DLCs or doing the optional ESO Plus subscription. So I've talked more about this in a value comparison video, and I'll link that at the top. So if you want more information specifically on the payment models, I'd check that video out. Lastly, we're going to talk about Guild Wars 2, and in a lot of ways, Guild Wars 2 is very comparable to the Elder Scrolls Online. They both have action combat systems, they both have horizontal progression systems, and I would say they're more focused on story elements than some other MMOs, though I'd say Final Fantasy is also very focused on story. So they're a nice set of 4 MMOs that we're comparing here because they do try and compete in certain areas. The big difference for Guild Wars 2, and a lot of people will say this, is that it is probably the most casual MMO on this list. And when I say casual, I don't mean the easiest, I mean it's the game that you probably need to put the least amount of hours into to stay competitive with other players, and that's both a good and a bad thing. So we'll start by saying why it's a good thing. The good thing is that I've been playing Guild Wars 2 really since, I guess since like Heart of Thorns launched. I've been playing the game consistently since then. However, really since Path of Fire launched, I've been playing it only when there's new content that's released. Because the game doesn't have a subscription fee and it is just the buy-to-play model for the expansions, if you own the game, you can drop in and out really easy, and it's often designed to do that. You can go in, play the story content, enjoy a new fractal, a new raid, whatever is released, and then forget about it for a month or so while you're playing a different MMO. And that works really well for some people and not as well for others. And the negative to this, and it'll kind of be my story here, is that my friend group switched to Guild Wars 2 at the start of Heart of Thorns to raid. We wanted to treat Guild Wars 2 as our primary MMO, and it was actually really good for about a year because the first 3 wings in Heart of Thorns released fairly regularly. They had some really good bosses, and the actual raids themselves are still probably some of my favorite raids ever implemented in any MMO. However, if you are aware of Guild Wars 2, you'll know that that wasn't the case as time went on. We got longer and longer gaps between each raid, and eventually we've gotten to a point where raids transitioned into strike missions, which have now kind of even petered out themselves. So I think one of the main issues is that for the, and I don't want to call us hardcore raiders because we definitely aren't, for people who are accustomed to a amount of content that you would expect from a premium sub-based game such as World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, there might not be enough high-end content for your liking. More to that though, they have obviously switched from raids to strike missions, which don't appeal to me and my friend group as much, but it might appeal to you, and that's completely fine. I think the biggest issue, and this is something I've tackled a lot with Guild Wars 2, is that they tend to switch their plans. For instance, it seemed like for a long time that they were doing the expansion releases. We had Heart of Thorns, and then we had Path of Fire, and then after Path of Fire, there was a lot of questions as to if there would be a third expansion. It wasn't, unlike World of Warcraft, where I can tell you that there's going to be an expansion after Shadowlands, there were some questions about this, because they tend to change their plans. I can now tell you that there is going to be a third expansion that comes out for Guild Wars 2. I, however, can't tell you what it will focus on. I can't tell you if there will be new raids in it. I can't tell you if there will be new strike missions or what exactly will happen. The game keeps you guessing, and it is kind of nice because you can get surprised. For instance, the introduction of mounts to the game was a huge surprise, and it was probably one of the most successful new features added to any of the big 4 MMOs ever, because the mount system blows away anything I've ever done before. However, it was a surprise. Another thing to keep in mind is that Guild Wars 2 is notoriously bad for supporting some types of its gameplay and not others. For instance, if you are interested in exploration of maps and story content, you can expect an update every 2 to 3 months with their Living World content. However, if you're super into SPVP, which is their structured PvP, that's more 5v5 conquest style gameplay, or their World v World, which is their big open world battles for castles and stuff like that, it might be quite some time between each update, and that's fine because the game modes do work in between them, but you don't feel like you're getting quite as much love as the other players, so it's something to keep in mind if that's what you're more focused on. Overall, Guild Wars 2 is one of the best value games you can play. It's really good for the price, and you can play the entire game for free with that little link down below if you wanted to. And it does offer a lot for players. So if you haven't tried it out, I do suggest checking out the game because it is a ton of fun. Long story short, these 4 games are all very much worth playing and might appeal to different types of players. So my final question to you before we wrap up is, which of these 4 big games are you still playing and why? And also, I guess if you're not playing one of these games, which game are you playing and why do you think it beats out these other 4 MMOs? As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please toss it a like, and if you're interested in more MMO content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'd love to have you here. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.